If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And be sure to watch all the way to the end of today's video because I'll have a special announcement to make that you won't want to miss. And now, the special commentary. From the outset, it needs to be said that there's one and only one form of racism: anti-black racism. That's it. Anything else, anywhere else in the world, is merely bigotry or prejudice. Ethnic groups can hate one another, but nothing anywhere compares to the all-consuming psychopathic hatred that black Americans are subjected to. We have done nothing to anyone. In fact, our ideas, our innovations, our philosophies, and our persistent fight to single-handedly fight for justice has been a blessing to the entire world. But all we've received in response are insults, scorn, and persecution. Nobody else can say that. For 50 years, we've done nothing but help any and everyone we've ever met. Our honor, our decency, and compassion are unmatched in all of human history, as is the dehumanization and unbroken parade of murders and racism that we have been subjected to. Places where we are not in significant numbers, in fact, a few places that we've never been, and yet the people who live in those places think that it's cute to attack us. I'm talking about Europe and Asia in particular. They freely indulge in blackface and other blatant racism, and neither their neighbors there nor Asians or Europeans here bat an eyelash about it. And the same goes in Latin America. From Mexico to Cuba to wherever, they go out of their way to show their racism against black people, but particularly against black Americans. And why is that? Why are we, above all, singled out when no one else is, not even black people from the diaspora? It is because we have done something to make them feel insecure with themselves. And what have we done? We represent the longest and strongest resistance movement in human history. No one else even comes close. There are many countries that have existed in the history of the world, many that have practiced systems of oppression, but there is only one where the oppressed came to basically define the culture of the country that oppressed them. Everyone else quits after a few weeks when it comes to fighting for freedom, and it usually comes to nothing. When we move, we stay at it. We stay on our grind, even for the struggle. And because we are constantly fighting a war against injustice, this makes it where on the few occasions when these other groups coincidentally get their noses bent out of joint about something, they can always point to us as inspiration because we are always fighting. And we've made changes. Make no mistake about that. These other groups flood here just to take advantage of it. Dr. King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But I would add that it's equally important to remember that the opposite is also true. Justice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. The example that we've shown, that persistence is the key to toppling white power and has become a living inspiration to the entire world. People all over this planet have copied and continue to copy the model of societal change that we've laid out. And when we got turned up in 2020, the whole world followed suit. No one else anywhere else has come to mean to the world what we have. That's not a brag. It's just a fact. Take, for instance, China. Their population is 6 times that of the United States, but when Tiananmen Square went down, nobody anywhere else in the world was inspired by that. Nobody else felt that they had to rise up too. It was treated as a local story because that's what it was. You cannot compare the struggle that the Chinese proletariat had against the Politburo to what we have endured. And that also goes for the U.S.-sponsored quote-unquote demonstrations in Hong Kong. You see, what's going on over there in China does not mean to the world what the black American struggle has. The Arab Spring, same thing. These little momentary flare-ups here and there, these regional uprisings, fail to capture the imagination and spirit of the world because nobody has the pure, irresistible energy that we have. When we make something, it sets a trend. Music, dance, business, sports, and political activism. Now, of course, it is impossible to talk about anti-black racism. It is impossible to talk about white supremacy without discussing the United States, which happens to be the heart of the evil empire. The reason that racism exists is because the majority of those classified as white need it. It is a self-justifying mechanism. The lies about black criminality and/or black inferiority are merely window dressing. The reason that anti-black racism has always been so persistent is that the people who rely on it don't have an alternative. Europeans tried all kinds of things to unite themselves before anti-black racism, and they all failed. They tried to use geography as a unifying principle, but they couldn't even be in the same zip code without a war breaking out. To this day, you still have European nations who do not want to be part of the European Union, groups who are clearly Caucasian but who want to draw distinctions, if not outright differences, between themselves, and even denigrate other European groups, and they say the Germans and the French aren't like them. They tried economics as a unifying principle, but white supremacists don't believe in a square deal, so that didn't work. They tried religion as a unifying principle, but all the European kings and despots decided that simply meant that God blessed all of their dishonesty and all of their treachery and violence, so that didn't work either. Finally, almost by accident, they came down to anti-black racism as a unifying principle. Anti-black racism was simultaneously a way to feel superior about being white, which was a unifying principle in and of itself, but it also served as a way for them to claim they needed to stick together. They needed to be united in order to keep black people at bay. Given the condition that Europe was in 500 years ago, they desperately needed something to try to bring them together because they were tearing themselves apart. And if black people didn't exist, then they would have had to make up a group to serve that same purpose. Look at what Britain did when it came to the Irish, if you want an example of that. They conveniently leave out that there's more white people in Africa than there are black people in Europe, and all of those white people in Africa got there by violently waging wars to force their way into the continent. And as for the Americas, these white supremacists began importing all those inferior, crime-prone black people as forced labor, and then they fought a war so that they could continue to do so. But they don't bring that up, do they? Because it would spoil the racist narrative that they depend on. White supremacy is fragile, so much so that those who need it can't really look at it for too long or it would crumble. This is why they have to make sure we remain completely and totally powerless. It wouldn't take a huge asteroid from outer space to crush white supremacy. A dedicated group of black people with sufficient resources could do the job, and the enemy knows it. This is why white supremacy spends so much of its resources creating and propping up all of these bootlicks and agents and operatives to confuse and undermine our morale and our internal politics. You see, the white supremacists learned a long time ago they have to be ultra-hyper-vigilant about anything that even remotely resembles a threat. White supremacy is like a person who has no immune system, a person whose white blood cells simply don't work. Like a person who has some sort of autoimmune disease or a person with some sort of biological irregularity. Any sort of microorganism or even virus that they come into contact with would mean death. Things that everyone else doesn't even get sick from would be potentially fatal for them, so they have to make sure they stay indoors all the time, and only certain people can be allowed around them, and even then only at a distance, and they have to carry a small arsenal of cleaning products with them wherever they go, and they can't be around groups, and they can only eat certain things. In other words, they have to have total and complete control of their environment, and to a large degree, they have to be able to control the people around them. It's kind of like whenever you're on board a commercial airline, or a cruise ship, or a charter bus, and they announce that there's somebody on board who happens to have some of those food allergies, so they can't serve peanuts or some other sort of food. White supremacy is analogous in that it's a disease, it's sick, and it's trying to force black people to conform to its own needs just so that it doesn't have to keel over. But white supremacy goes a step further than merely being sick and needing to create an environment where nothing can even remotely threaten it. White supremacy is a parasite. It must have a host that it can drain the life's blood from, like a leech growing fatter by the day while its host gets weaker. And when it's done draining one host's blood, it immediately hops on another. This describes the racial and geographical behavior of white supremacy, and it also describes the economic behavior of it as well. Look at what condition Europe was in at the close of the 15th century. Plagues, disease, famines, feuding, and all manner of civil strife. And that was just in Britain. They were not just on the verge of collapse, they had already fallen into ruins. So what did they do to rebuild? Nothing. They instead began leaving Europe. Europeans went to Asia and began begging for food and handouts and craftsmanship. They also began taking the education that the Moors brought to southern Europe and appropriated that, falsely claiming in the process that they themselves had invented it. And then they began to invade Africa. And then what would become known as the Americas, and what would come to be known as Australia. Everywhere they went, the white supremacists enslaved, destroyed, forced others to build their wealth, and in the cases of Tasmania and the Caribbean islands, they utterly annihilated the people who lived there. slaughter them down to the last child. And no sooner than they completed one genocide than they were immediately off to carry out the next. This is what white supremacy is, like a vampire terrified of the sunlight, something that is harmless to healthy organisms, but is lethal to an unnatural parasite. And like a vampire, when white supremacy gets its fangs into its victims, one of two things happens. Either it kills its victim outright, or they infect their victim, turning them into a vampire as well. And the victim then begins running around, imitating the same demonic behavior of the vampire that bit them. Killing, ravaging, destroying, all in an attempt to preserve itself just a little bit longer. Because the vampire is incapable of practicing a healthy way of life, it instead resorts to a destructive way of death. Now, when you're dealing with something this diseased, this weak, this unable to survive on its own, then the real question is, should it continue to exist? In order for any organism to continue to survive as a species, it has to achieve equilibrium with its environment. You cannot devour everything. There must be practical limits to whatever resources you consume, and to whatever behavior you engage in. Chop down all the trees, pretty soon it's going to be hard to build yourself a house. You decide that you're going to build nothing but roads and pavement everywhere, pretty soon you're going to have no farmland. If you sleep too little, you'll soon become overstressed and die. If you sleep too much, you'll become weak, atrophied, and unresponsive. You eat too much food, you'll become slovenly and your body stops functioning properly. You eat too little food and you'll become malnourished and your body begins breaking down. But you can only survive off of as much resources as you have available to you. Use up all your resources and the next thing that will get used up is you. White supremacy largely justified its existence by extolling the virtues of excess. Enormous houses, huge estates, huge amounts of servants, huge parties, huge amounts of food, and huge wardrobes. They promoted images that idealized the idea of people having so much that it didn't even make sense anymore. They had more than they could ever use, and what they did use was so excessively large it served no practical purpose. But that, of course, was the entire point, to have so much that it was overwhelming, and to make people desire that, train and condition them to chase after that is the right thing to do. It's a seductive fantasy the white supremacy created through their media, more so since white power impoverished most of the world. White supremacy made people poor, and then dangled an illusion of opulent wealth in front of them, and for people who have been deprived of the ability to create prosperity for themselves, who have been stripped of the ability to enjoy whatever opportunities exist, for people like that, this illusion would be all but irresistible, and they would begin to chase after it, even kill and betray each other for even the chance to have it. And that's how white supremacy incentivizes the bootlicks, the tethers, the turncoats. Like a person bitten by a vampire. See, white supremacy initially conquers people through military force, but it keeps people in bondage through psychological warfare. That is to say, it enslaves people through ideas. And it doesn't leave it to chance. White power carpet bombs you with the ideas that they want you to practice, the things that they want you to internalize. Bad ideas are a way to place chains on people's minds. Worst of all, when people get used to wearing chains, after a while they start to think the chains are supposed to be there. It becomes natural to them. And if you call yourself removing those chains, they'll fight you. Like Harriet Tubman said, I could have freed 1,000 more people if only I could have convinced them that they were slaves. White supremacy is insidious like that. It gets its hooks into you, and a lot of black folks don't even know it. Portraying their excess as being glamorous, as being something to aspire to, that's how they condition people to want to copy it, and to want to copy them. But of course they make sure not to dwell too much on where all this excess wealth that they flaunt in front of you actually came from. All of the white supremacist abortive attempts at using culture as a unifying principle hadn't worked and never could because white supremacist culture is not based on unity. It's based on dominance. So all the pathetic attempts to invoke Aryan this or Celtic that or Slavic this or Nordic that or Anglo whatever as a unifying principle hasn't worked for the European and never will. So they resorted to anti-black racism. And, at least on the surface, it seemed to provide just enough of a distraction where they could actually peel their hands away from one another's throats. Anti-black racism is simple, which is good for ignorant people. Even the dumbest bigot in the room can distinguish the difference in color. And then they set about putting policies in place meant to prop up their manufactured lies of black inferiority. Anti-black racism not only gives them motivation to carry out their brutality that they already want to do, but it also justifies every barbaric, demonic, evil thing that they've done. Harming black people merely for existing becomes a perk of being classified as white. It also is given a wink and a nod as being self-defense against genetic annihilation. Thank you very much, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And even if they can't justify their anti-black crimes, they can always fall back on the lie that black people are all criminals and unproductive. So black people are to blame for being harmed, and if all else fails, then they can always bring out a few bootlicks and a few tethers and a few turncoats to say that black people don't mind being harmed. We forgive, forgive, forgive. And they relentlessly saturate us in this anti-black propaganda. They have to preach the sermon that anti-black racism is a victimless crime. They have to go over the top with it and do it constantly. Because when you're committing the greatest crime in human history, you're going to need to tell the biggest lie in human history. Though we have to control the controllables for ourselves, we have to stop looking for friends where we have none. Recently, a lot of people have been talking about Michael O'Hare, the former NFL player, and about how, after over a decade, he's finally refuted the narrative of the movie The Blind Side and its white savior gibberish. Michael O'Hare now says that he was tricked by the white family he had been living with, the Tuohys, into signing a conservatorship that gave them control over his money. He's also saying that while the Tuohys made out like bandits off the royalties they received from the Blind Side movie, he got little to nothing from it. By the way, the clowns who try to defend the Tuohys and say they didn't rip him off, they already had money before the movie came out. They didn't need any more money, hence they had no incentive to trick him. Well, if that's true, then why did the Tuohys take any money at all from the Blind Side movie? Why did they want a conservatorship over Mr. O'Hare's money? They got paid off of that movie. The only way that you can claim that somebody doesn't need money is if they do not take it if it's offered to them. Again, though, these apologists keep trying to have it both ways. Though Mr. O'Hare himself, while he talked about the money he didn't get and how the movie made his own NFL teammates think that he was educably retarded, he still does the whole I'm grateful for the opportunities the movie gave me, etc., etc. He was the entire reason that that movie even existed, but he keeps wanting to believe this was all one big misunderstanding. And that's an illustration of why it is that as the black grassroots, we don't go following after black celebrities. Even when they seem to get it right, they still can't resist the urge to turn right around and get it wrong anyway. It should not have taken Mr. O'Hare this long for him to come forward. Too many times we put ourselves in the trick bag and refuse to get out of it. But ultimately the reason racism exists is because we have not amassed enough numbers or enough resources to crush it. Yet. And that's the operative term, yet. Because we are moving in that direction. That's why you come here. This is why the black media does what it does. The ongoing project to destroy white supremacy and the racial privilege that fuels it won't stop. The enemy is determined. We will be relentless. It's like a boxing match. One fighter can win every single round on points, even score a couple of knockdowns against his opponent. But it means nothing if the other fighter gets up and scores a knockout. This is not about points or knockdowns. This is about who's still standing at the end. Yes, we have to keep tabs on the enemy, and we will. You can't win a war without observing the enemy's behavior. But what we are doing is far more important than what the enemy is up to. You can't stop people from being evil, but you can stop them from acting on their evil impulses. You can create an economic, political, and social environment where evil behavior is harshly punished and rewarding decent people is encouraged. You call that black empowerment. You call that the world set to rights. You call that justice. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of this special commentary, after today I'll be taking a few weeks off. And make no mistake, I'm going to be missing you guys as much as I'm sure some of you might miss me. Though fear not, my absence also provides an opportunity. There's over 700 plus videos on this channel. I encourage everyone to go through the archives here and listen to what's been said so far over the last few years. I noticed that my video about the persecution of Sifo Bennett has caught on, and there's plenty more like that on this channel. As the black media, we're often years ahead of the curve, and we pride ourselves on expressing ideas that are more than paper thin. If there was ever content that had true replay value, it's the black media's content. When you hear what it is that we've already posted, you'll find that every time you listen to it, you catch things that you hadn't caught the first time, or things that you heard months or even years ago take on greater resonance when you listen to it now. Now, as for when it is that this hiatus comes to an end, I'll most likely resume posting somewhere around mid-September, though there's always the chance that I'm going to feel the need to post the occasional remarks somewhere in between. We will see. But in the meanwhile, be sure to go through the videos already posted on this channel, and also visit the other New Voices of Black Media. TBA and Tariq Nasheed naturally are at the top of that list, but also you should be following Lisa Cabrera, Tarian Rain, Your World, Vicky Dillard, Philip Scott, Mad Black TV, that's our brother Crazy House, and a number of others. We, as the Black media, have a wealth of insightful, eloquent, and discerning commentators, people who are able to tell you what's really going on, and what the things you're seeing really mean. I know that a lot of you like to talk about pop culture and online figures and such. I get that. I don't make it a point to focus on those things myself, but there's a lot of folks in this Black media sphere who do. And guess what? They have meaningful and intelligent things to say about it. So I'm going to trust the family to keep the racist, trolls, tethers, defeatist, bedwenches, and bootlicks in line. All of us have worked hard as a group to make this Black media online space a place where intelligent Black people can hear something they didn't know, and they can count on insight and commentary that's about informing you, not about trying to do some half-brained comedy routine or some stupid attempt at some FM morning radio humor. Black people have strong minds, and strong minds don't need mental candy or sugar. That'll just rot your brain. Strong minds require strong nourishment. Black people who are looking for entertainment need to keep on looking because you haven't found it here. But those who are looking for the Black truth, well, you've come to the right place. So before I sign off for a bit, I'll remind you once again that whenever I or any of the new Black media personalities you trust talk about the Black media, we're not talking about ourselves alone. Yes, we are the figures who you've coalesced around, but we're just mouthpieces. When we say Black media, that means you. As the audience, as the people who listen to this message, as the people who care about Black empowerment as much as we do, your involvement is every bit as important as ours. Do not ever underestimate the power and importance of you being here. Whatever it is we hope to accomplish has far more to do with what you do than with anything that I or anyone else in new Black media says. I know that because we're the ones behind the mic. We're the ones who craft the words and the messages, and we're the ones who you appreciate because we say things the way that you wish you could say them. But without you, all of us would be nothing more than just a bunch of very eloquent, very irrelevant nobodies. How do I know that? Because when I began doing this 16 years ago, there were a lot of Negroes still doing that pseudo-intellectual crap, bastardizing the work and the style of our grandmaster teachers. We ran them out of the paint, and by we, I mean you. When you stopped listening to them, they shriveled up and blew away. See, a few of these fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools tried to imitate the kind of talk that we do here, but they just weren't smart enough, so they can't keep up with this kind of discourse. They only know how to blather and make stupid jokes, so when it comes time to actually look at the issues, to show the discernment, to read the tea leaves and tell our people what's coming, they're like deer in headlights. Well, as Black media, we understand that our people deserve better. Yes, there will always be some Negroes who the white media gives some money to and artificially gives them a higher profile, manufactures a platform for them, but so what? Once that white media money goes away, and it always goes away, so will these puppets. What would an Issa Rae be without the white media to prop her up? Her crowdfunding pulled in only a fraction of what the new Black media efforts regularly do, so we know who has the pulse of the people. And don't go getting confused by focusing only on things like subscriber counts or viewership. I won't say that that's meaningless, but the truth is most people in this life are merely passing through. They're floating like a leaf on a stream. They will remain bystanders, fighting for nothing, standing for nothing. They don't live. They merely exist. When it comes time to stand up for what's right, when it comes time to fight injustice, they're going to be looking around, acting helpless, waiting to see who else is going to do the hard work. Well, the ones who do the hard work are also the ones who earn the glory, and they should. When you have an audience in the millions, that means you have a lot of people who will just sit there no matter what. You got a lot of useless people around you. It is the quality of your numbers that matter, not the quantity. It is never the masses of the people who overthrow evil. If that was the case, then there would never be any oppression. It is always a small, determined, relentless group of people who change the world. Because I'll be the first one to tell you that especially when I was young, I was just like the rest of you. Where were all of these black people who I knew saw the BS just like I did and disagreed with it just like I did? If they were out here, where the heck were they? And then I started actually talking to other black people, first in person and later on online. And what I found very quickly was in one loud, unified voice, you all answered, "We're right here." I know a lot of you say that I make you proud, but you got it backwards. You're the ones who honor me by being here. You are the proof that what we have been saying and what we believe wasn't just belief, it's a fact. And I want to renew and reaffirm my dedication to proving myself worthy of your trust and support. So I thank you once again, and I salute each and every one of you for being my guides and for being my inspiration on this journey to Black empowerment. And the best part is, we're just getting started. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Charlie, Jacques Harget, Black Voltron Reloaded, Liban Gurhan, and Marsh Web Solutions. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Now more than ever, Black empowerment only exists because of you.